What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Nick, and I am back with some more States of Metal. And this time, we are going to Texas. Now, honestly, this was kind of part of the plan in terms of doing like newer death metal bands, because Ohio has a really fucking solid scene in terms of like new death metal coming out. Guess what? So does Texas. In fact, Texas, you know, there's a little bit of a rivalry, I think. Like, not like a, you know, like, fuck you, Ohio, fuck you, Texas kind of fucking rivalry, but in terms of like scenes that are fucking bubbling up in terms of death metal, they both have it fucking going on. In fact, I usually talk to my buddies over the Magma Chamber about who has the best death metal scene. And honestly, like, for a while, I was kind of conceding that Texas did, but I don't know. Ohio's pretty fucking good here lately, so I don't know. It's a good, healthy competition, I think. If there was a competition, I don't really think there is, but you know, it's kind of fun to talk about it like there is. So, Texas. What do I know about it? Well, it's fucking huge. The whole saying everything's bigger in Texas, they're talking about the state too, but I mean, just everything's fucking huge. Fucking buildings, the steers, I mean, I've seen pictures of fucking steers that look like they could deadlift a fucking cement truck. Lots of oil, and by that, oil barons, cowboys, both the real kind and the frequently overhyped kind, and as I said, a really cool death metal scene, especially right now. Now, that isn't to say that they didn't have a death metal scene in the past, but here lately, there just seems to be a plethora of awesome death metal bands coming out of the state of Texas. So much like the last one, I have 10 albums here from 10 different bands. I'm also going a little bit extra here, making sure I'm repping one band that unfortunately I couldn't fit on this list because I had the other ones I wanted to bring up. But Tribal Gaze, if you haven't heard of this band, definitely check them out. This is fucking fresh, new, awesome death metal. We just covered their new release, and it's fucking brutal as hell. And in the background, I don't know if you can actually hear it, I am jamming Church of Disgust, which is another awesome Texas death metal band that formed here recently. I've been a fan of them since their first EP, and yeah, definitely another one worth checking out. But on this list, it is mostly newer stuff, but I did pepper in some slightly older stuff there too, because again, there are a lot of bands to represent, and whittling this down to 10 was fucking difficult, much like it was for Ohio. I wanted to get a good variety on this one because there's a lot of different styles of death metal that have been popping up out of Texas, and there's a lot of really fucking killer bands, and I mean, killer music is no stranger to Texas. This is the home of fucking ZZ Top and Pantera, and if you like digging into like, you know, the more underground stuff, Rigor Mortis is great, and of course the mighty Power Trip, rest in peace Riley. We all fucking still miss you. So yeah, Texas and awesome music have kind of always been a thing. But yeah, let's just get into this list because I got some good ones for you. Frozen Soul, Crypt of Ice. This is the debut full length from this Fort Worth band. Pretty much, I don't know if I need to do much of an introduction because this album fucking blew up in popularity pretty quickly. I wanted to open up with a pretty fucking recognizable one, and I mean, this album pretty much ended up on the year-end lists of most people. I know it was on my year-end list. This came out, I believe, in January or February, appropriately, because it was fucking freezing cold here then. And at that point, that early on, last year, I had a strong feeling this would be a year-ender for me. This band combines so much of that old school bolt thrower groove, but with like a Mortician style heaviness and that sort of hardcore fucking energy. The riffs on here are just absolutely crushing. Chad Green's vocal delivery is very similar to Carl Willett's. So much so, I think the band has pretty much embraced their bolt thrower comparisons. I've even heard them called cold thrower before. It's fucking appropriate. But this band was pretty much signed on the strength of their demo Encased in Ice, and I can see why, because I got that one too. And again, just sort of blew up in the underground. They tour relentlessly. Their riffs are catchier than hell, but they're also brutal, but they have excellent hooks. Hand of Vengeance and Faceless Enemy in particular are insanely catchy for how brutal they are. And I love the fact that they keep with this theme in terms of like all the cold stuff. I mean, Crypt of Ice, the opening track, is great. Arctic Stranglehold, one of my favorite tracks on here. Beat to Dust has some insanely nasty slam riffs, and surprisingly that one doesn't involve anything cold on it. But yeah, I love this album. They are actually working on their follow-up right now. I believe Matt Heafy is actually producing it, so I'm really curious what that one's gonna sound like, because he's a really good sound engineer as well as a guitarist. The atmosphere is kind of key in between all of these nasty riffs, like especially the song Case and I, where you get like some nasty stab wounds while someone's screaming. I don't know if there are 200 of them, but they definitely got the job done. But yeah, this band probably doesn't need much more gushing from me, but if you have not checked out Frozen Soul, you've been missing out on one of Texas's finest exports. Or if you actually live in Texas, this is like your hometown heroes, or at least they should be. Definitely check this out. Fucking amazing album, and looking forward to that new one. Imprecation, Damnatio ad Bestias. This is the second full length from this Houston band. Now, this band was actually around back in the 90s and got a lot of demos. I don't have any of that stuff, and I didn't get into them until this album, which came out in 2019. In fact, if you go back into Thralls history, like before we knew anything about lighting and much about editing, this was one of the early reviews that John and I did, and we actually had never heard of this band before, and we became fans of it pretty much right after this release. This band plays very heavily to Incantation and Morbid Angel. This is more evil, blasphemous death metal with really solid atmosphere. They use keys very well in here, but a lot of this is very doomy and sinister and ugly. Again, a lot of Morbid Angel vibes, but this is more similar to like the Steve Tucker era, namely Gateways to Annihilation. The songs tend to be slow and sludgy in spots, but they break out into like just nasty blast beats and just dark, evil tremolos left and right. I like that they kind of embody a lot of Incantation songwriting style too, and the fact that they'll get fast and blasty and then drop into massive death doom breakdowns, especially on songs like Morbid Crucifixion or Dagger, Thurible, Altar of Death. I have no idea what a Thurible is, but it sounds like it's appropriately evil if it matches the song. And this band, while I wouldn't call them necessarily blackened death metal, I mean, in terms of the themes, like it definitely has like a blackened death metal vibe, but the riffs overall feel more straightforward death metal. But the song Baptized in Satan's Blood definitely has some black metal touches for some cool atmosphere in there too. I love this entire album, but I have to say the last two tracks in here, The Shepherd and the Flock and Ageless Ones of None, both are probably the best songs on here. They pretty much embody this band's entire style. The breakdown on Shepherd alone is one of the heaviest moments on this entire album. Absolutely massive, and it just sounds like the gates of hell opening, which I think is pretty much appropriate for this band. Now, sadly, not long after this album came out, their drummer and keyboardist Ruben Elizondo died from COVID, which my heart goes out to the band for that. They still managed to go out to MDF and play an awesome live set, and it's good to see them rebound from tragedy because by the time this comes out, they will have a new album out, which of course we definitely want to review. But yeah, if you've never checked out Imprecation, I strongly recommend this one. Honestly, I have the album before this. I thought it was also really good, but I think this one might be a little bit better. I have not checked out their earlier demos, but pretty much in all the circles I've talked in terms of death metal, they are speaked of very highly, so I'm eventually going to have to get a hold of at least a compilation of them. So yeah, if you like your death metal blasphemous and heavy enough to fucking crush a mega church in Texas, definitely check this one out. Devourment, Butcher the Weak. This is the second album from this Dallas-based band. Came out in 2005, though this is the 2006 edition that was re-recorded. And honestly, I'm not a big Slam fan. I've been pretty much transparent about that, but you cannot argue how much influence this band has had in terms of the brutal death metal scene in Texas. These guys are kind of one of like the linchpin bands that really got that movement going, and there are a lot of brutal death metal bands in fucking Texas. This album is fucking heavy, like one of the heaviest ones that are probably on this list. While this band is definitely known for its giant slam breaks, inhuman gurgles, and just, well, flat out fucking interesting song titles, which I'll eventually read some of them because, I don't know, I kind of like tempting fate with being demonetized every now and then, but these are too fucking good not to talk about. But along with that, pretty much Liege of Inveracity style, slam sort of style, like I really feel like that whole subset is really built around that one moment. Of course, there's other big breakdowns out there that really influenced this entire subset, but I think that's the one. But there is a lot of technical play on here, like almost comparable to a band like Defeated Sanity. Gravity blasts, really wild crawling riffs. The whole album essentially just kind of pushes the limits of how heavy you can be and still actually have some hooks. And honestly, some of these slam riffs are fucking nasty. The big slams that really stood out to me that I thought were especially good were Masturbating at the Slab and Serial Cocksucker, which I guess everyone's gotta have a hobby. But this whole album is just insanely brutal, and I mean, there possibly are some fucking worse song titles. Anal Electrocution and Fuck Her Head Off. Pretty good. Now, I do have to say, like, after a while, Mike Majewski's vocals kind of got on my nerves. They are just sort of low gurgles that really don't sound like they're attempting to say any words. Like, every now and then you get, like, a higher scream in there, but mostly they're just gross and disgusting, but it does fit with the music. And at times, even with the vocals, I found Anal Electrocution very catchy. Again, we have to say weird sentences when we talk about some shit on here. Now, initially, I was very dismissive of this band, but going back and listening to it, this actually isn't too bad. It's actually aged a little bit better than I thought, and I really did like their last album, Obscene Majesty, which is a little bit different and a little bit more caustic, but I think the more atmospheric and possibly even heavier sound on there really, worked well. But namely, I wanted to go over this band because, again, hyper influential band. Anyone that likes brutal death metal and slam pretty much brings up this band, and I can totally see why. They definitely had an impact on that entire scene. So yeah, if you have never checked out Devourment, I would say start here. I hear their debut's really good. I don't have that one, but this is just insanely brutal shit. And if you like shit like Defeated Sanity, Dying Fetus, Suffocation, and just slam in general, you're probably gonna love this. So check it out. Hinayana, Death of the Cosmic EP. This is the first EP from this Austin-based melodic death doom act. Now this was on my year-end list for 2021 EPs, and initially when I heard this, I thought this band was European. This does not sound like, well, a US band just in terms of its overall style. This is more along the lines of bands like Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, and I wanted to bring this one up because it shows off some diversity in terms of Texas death metal. A lot of us associated with that more groovy, sort of hardcore infused old school death metal sound. And there's a ton of them. And believe me, there's more on this list. But this band stands out mainly because this is more melodic, but it still retains all the brutality. It's dark, it's somber, it's moody, very similar to Dark Tranquility and Amorphous as well. And I think the songwriting here is absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of tension building. The vocals stay really heavy, like they're a good, solid, low roar. Kind of similar to actually Johan Hegg from Amon Amarth. And, regardless of what people say about Amon Amarth's music, I think Johan's got some killer fucking vocals. There's lots of atmosphere, like rainstorms used in there. There's even a slide guitar in there, which that should have been like a kind of a clue that this was from Texas, but my mind was pretty much firmly focused on, I would say, Finland. I thought this was from Finland. The synths are particularly lush on here and really complement the atmosphere and all the riffs and melodies. The production is absolutely excellent on here. And while this does pack a lot of killer hooks and killer melodies, it does get flat out brutal. I think In Sacred Delusion was pretty damn heavy in spots. It does get a little bit more up-tempo here and there, but this is mostly slow, dreary, very melancholy, and it works. Like, if you're a giant Paradise Lost fan especially, I think you're gonna find a lot of stuff you like on here. Now, despite coming out on Napalm Records, this kind of flew under the radar, and initially, again, I had totally forgot this band was from Texas. Again, I was pretty much thinking this band came from Finland because that made sense to my brain. But when I was doing research and I saw this, I was like, dude, this is a great way to show off that Texas has a lot of different shit in terms of their death metal scene, and I think this EP is absolutely fucking excellent. Going back to it, it's like, wow, dude, like, you can really get lost in this. And it still retains all the heaviness on there. Like, it still feels dark and oppressive, but not just in a brutal way. It's kind of like an all-encompassing heavy. Excellent EP. If you have never checked out this band before, I believe they have a full length that I haven't checked out yet, but based on the strength of this EP, I will definitely go back and check it out. Again, this is the sad boy, fucking just down in the dumps, death doomy style, but again, lots of killer melody on here. So yeah, definitely check this one out. This is great for a rainy day in Texas, if it does rain in Texas. I don't know, it seems like it's mostly desert there. Or at least like northern Texas or like northwest Texas. I don't know much about Texas, but I know that there's a good chunk of it that's a desert, right? Anyway, definitely check this out. Awesome EP. Mammoth Grinder, Extinction of Humanity. This is the second full length from this Austin-based death metal crust, hardcore, I don't know. This is definitely death metal centric, but man, it is heavy in a lot of fucking different ways. Now this actually features Chris Olsch of Power Trip and Iron Age. I actually may have got into this band before I ever got into Power Trip, and this is where I started, and holy shit, this is just a fucking gnarly release. First off, this album has some of the most ridiculous fucking feedback to kick off songs I've heard. Like, it is piercing loud, but when you get down to this crusty, D-beat driven fucking nastiness, holy shit, this album just rolls the fuck over you. Lots of downpicking. The production here sounds like it was just done in one room to sort of capture the live vibe. Everything on here just sounds murky but well mixed. I wouldn't say this sounds muddy, it just sounds dirty, but it has that appropriate level of grit to it to match with this sort of crust punk background behind all these death metal riffs. This album clearly worships the Stockholm sound and a lot of the early crust punk, anarcho-punk stuff from before that inspired the whole Stockholm sound. But I would even say it has a little bit of like the death and roll swagger in spots. Like I definitely got some Wolverine blues nods on here. The whole album, again, sounds like they just jammed it out in the studio kind of in one fucking take and then went out and committed some like vandalism or light arson to celebrate. The only moments when it's not full tilt aggression are probably the moments of feedback on here. Like you get some good groovy sections, but a lot of this is D-beat oriented and again interchanging between just nasty sort of punk riffs like that fierce downpicking and then like death metal tremolos, especially on Frozen and Devoured by Fear. Two of my favorites on here, but honestly this whole album just whoops ass. Vocally this definitely has more of a hardcore bite to it, but when you get down to the instrumental track resurfacing and they kind of strip back a lot of the punk elements, all that death metal glory really comes forward. It's barely a half an hour. If not, it is like just a half an hour, but this is a relentless listen. I absolutely love this band. I own all their albums except for the first one, which I think the first one only came out on tape, unless there's like a CD floating out there, which point me in the right fucking direction, because I'll fucking buy it. But I definitely wanted to bring up this band mainly because of its ties to Power Trip and Iron Age, which I did think about doing thrash for this date, but you know, death metal kind of won out. But this band's status is kind of unknown right now, and I would love to see them resurface because they occupy a really cool territory within the whole Texas scene, being again more punky and kind of thrashy, but also still very much a death metal band. And again, one of the things about this video is I wanted to show off the variety of killer death metal in Texas, and this band just flat out whoops ass. If you've never jammed this, I strongly recommend it, but honestly, I strongly recommend literally anything by this band because Mammoth Grinder fucking rules. So yeah, definitely check this one out. Fucking whoops ass. Cathexis from Texas, that rhymes. Untethered Abyss. This is their third album, came out in 2021, and this is more technical death metal, but technical and atmospheric. Like this isn't like the blur of noodles and arpeggios and all that stuff that you would probably associate with bands like Necrophagus. This is definitely more brutal and more riff oriented. Honestly, their overall sound kind of reminds me of a mix of Suffocation and early Rivers of Nile. Like it has that sort of thicker, more atmospheric guitar tone. There's a lot of dissonant riffs, but vocally, there are some just flat-out brutal moments. Ian's vocals on here are exceptionally just low and gurgly, like they are kind of similar to Frank Mullen, honestly. Now, not only did I want to bring up this one because it's just a fucking awesome album, but we actually hung out with these guys pretty much all throughout Maryland Death Fest, and we had a great time just fucking checking out bands, BSing, and even had a fucking fun night drinking our asses off when it was storming and threatening to drop tornadoes on Maryland. Legit, the last 3 times I've been to Maryland, there have been tornado warnings. I think that state's trying to tell me something. But I was a fan of this album long before we even met them, and holy shit, this just fucking rips. I like the fact that the guitars create a lot of the atmosphere, and subject matter on here definitely dives into more like Lovecraftian territory, so there's that sort of like, you know, horror spookiness. In fact, I do think they reference one of the stories with Red Hook. And while this album gets flat out brutal with songs like Harrowing Manifestation and Isolated Malevolence, the song Library of Babel slows it down to almost like a Death Doom-like pace. It's almost like technical Death Doom with its very interesting crawling riffs, but this sludgy, nasty atmosphere. It's kind of like a creature crawling out of a fucking swamp to murder the fuck out of you. I mean, I don't know if they have swamps in Texas. I don't know, desert creature, whatever. But they do everything in their power to make that just even more evil sounding with like the big doomy riffs and vocals that even sound possibly more sinister than they do brutal at times. This is the kind of like technical death metal that I generally like. It's still riff oriented, there's groove in there, and honestly, it's just not a lot of like wankery and showing off all the time. While the lead play on here is great and the guitar interplay is amazing, hell, even the bass playing on here is really fucking solid, none of it feels like it's detracting or just showing off. All of it comes together really well, and it creates this just massive sounding album. Now, this is the only album I'm familiar with them by. They do have 2 other albums that were released, I believe, independently. I definitely want to hunt those down. But this, I can definitely tell you, is fucking killer. This was close to making my year-end list last year. I believe it made John's, but I definitely wanted to showcase this one because, again, this kind of shows off a different style of death metal in Texas, and These guys are fucking killing it. This album is absolutely amazing, and if you have not checked it out, I strongly recommend it. Again, think early Rivers of Nile and Suffocation combined, and then I'm sure as you listen to it, you'll probably hear some other cool shit too, because this is just a badass album. So yeah, check it out. Malignant Altar. Realms of Exquisite Morbidity. This is the debut full-length from this Houston-based death metal act that I should have had on my year-end list last year, but it came out in December and I was already done with my year-end list by then, and fuck. Now, I initially got hyped to this band courtesy of their Retribution of Jealous Gods demo, and I was initially really intrigued when I saw the ex-members of Insect Warfare on here, namely Dauber Beverly on drums, who also drums for Oceans of Slumber, and Necrofire, and even Church of Disgust was on here. And when I heard it, this is absolutely some of the best Morbid Angel worshipping death metal I've heard in years. And I've definitely heard a lot, but holy shit, these guys flat out get it. The pummeling riffs, the atmosphere, this is dark, sludgy, very atmospheric. And the drum work is one of the things that really propels this. While there's definitely a lot of stuff that really latches on to Pete Sandoval's style, like the insanely fast blast beats and kick drums and the little pockets of snare rolls in between the blast beats, Dauber definitely has his own style though that really comes out with like more jazzy fills on here and just really cool, like kind of off-time moments on here that really just open this album up. This whole album pretty much plays to everything I love about death metal. There are great riffs on here. It can be melodic at times. Most of the time it is very just brutal and just beat you over the head with big chuggy riffs, evil sounding tremolos, and flat out disgusting fucking breakdowns, especially usurping the Pantheon crown, and the re-recorded version of Ceremonial Decapitator, which I love the whole isolated bass lead in to the fucking just earth-shattering fucking breakdown that comes after that. All the songs, I think, are very well written. Even the interlude, which is the title track, which I still think is kind of weird, it does set up the next batch of songs really well as like a side two on a vinyl maybe. But everything is very well paced. Songs build really well. Like you get a lot of moments where they just kind of hang on a riff and slowly build the intensity going into the next moment, and I think that is just a testament to their songwriting. Much like Imprecation, I think this is kind of that perfect balance of evil atmosphere and flat out just death metal brutality. You have all the moments that are fiercely mosh-worthy with giant breakdowns, but there's a lot of build-up and extra creepiness, and the vocal performance on here is just disgusting as well. It's very dry, it's kind of gurgly. I don't know, it all contributes really well to the atmosphere and again, the flat out brutality of this. Pretty much in a nutshell, this entire album rips. It pretty much captures everything I love about really well done Morbid Angel worshipping death metal. And I can't wait for another full length. Hopefully it comes out sooner than December so I can actually put it on a year-end list if it's, you know, pretty much up to snuff with this one. Flat out, amazing band. If you have never heard of this band, I strongly recommend this one. I also recommend finding the Retribution of Jealous Gods demo, which is absolutely fucking killer as well. In my mind, you can't go wrong with Morbid Angel worship unless they're worshiping Illumina Manus, and then I have a lot of questions as to why you even fucking bothered. But this doesn't do that. This is just fucking disgusting old school death metal, and you should definitely check it out. Embodiment, Embrace the Eternal. So their debut full length came out in 1998. This band is from Arlington, Texas, and honestly, in terms of the grand scheme of their entire discography, this might be the only death metal release that they had. They kind of shifted more to a deathcore sound and then really kind of sold the fuck out and did kind of a new metal, alternative metal sort of sound for a while, which I really wasn't much of a fan of, even though I own one of those albums. And I mean, it's okay, but it does not compare to this. Now, this came out on Solid State / Tooth and Nail Records, which, yes, this band is Christian, so they won't be touring with Imprecation anytime soon. That and they broke up. But this is one that I found actually when I was down in Florida, and I've been looking for this for a while because I had heard songs from this on samplers from both Solid State and Tooth and Nail, and I was like, dude, this sounds really good. It's definitely hardcore, metalcore oriented in spots, but for the most part, this is flat out death metal and particularly brutal death metal. Now, vocally, it doesn't necessarily match up in terms of the brutal riffs. It is more of a hardcore, metalcore scream on it. But when it comes down to the riffs, Jesus, there are some massive slams on here, lots of cool tremolo riffs, and it has sort of that syncopated chugginess that you would hear in Decapitated albums. The drum work on here is very wild, like you get nasty breakdowns, solid grooves, lots of blast beats. And the guitar work in here I think could be really interesting because it's, you know, pulling from a lot of different camps. Like you get some more like screeching hardcore riffs, but you also get a lot of death metal tremolos, and again, like the flat out chugginess. And the guitar tone in here is more of like a thrashy death metal tone overall. There are elements of brutal death metal in here with the giant slams that are on here, and tech death with some of the really impressive, intricate playing. But the thing that really struck me is the atmosphere in here is very dark despite being, you know, Christians. I'm sure all the preacher samples and church bells that were added here to, you know, add atmosphere were intended to reinforce their love of Jesus or some shit. But the overall vibe is actually more unsettling, which actually contributes to how dark and heavy the music is. I don't know, I hear church bells on a death metal album, I'm not thinking about Jesus, I'm thinking, holy shit, that sounds evil. But I really dig this album, and it kind of stands out not only because it's, you know, Christian death metal, but because, again, this was this band's only real death metal release, and it is absolutely fucking heavier than shit. And I think kind of often overlooked. Like, when I brought this up, there were definitely a fair amount of people like, holy shit, that album's fucking amazing. But I don't think a lot of people really know about this band. And again, it's sort of an interesting one to throw in this pile just because they're a little bit different. But I wanted to because, again, I love this album. Like, across the board, these songs are fucking heavier than hell. They're well written. And it's a shame that not only they abandoned their sound, but they broke up before getting a chance to possibly reestablish it. I would definitely say this probably had more of an impact on the deathcore scene overall, but still, I think this is some absolutely killer death metal and highly underrated. So yeah, if you have never checked out this band, I recommend this one and maybe their demo collection. Outside of that, it gets a little bit dicey and not so death metal-y, but still the early stuff is absolutely killer, so check it out. Creeping Death at the Edge of Existence EP. This is their second EP, came out in 2021. This band is from Denton, Texas, and this is, I would say, one of the up-and-coming bands in Texas death metal right now, right alongside Frozen Soul. Now, this was one of my favorite EPs of 2021, so I get another chance to gush about it. Now, I was going to use Resolutions as my example for this band. I really love that debut, but I went with this one instead. Not only does this showcase more like new material from them, this also shows re-recorded versions of their older material, which is also fucking awesome. The first 3 tracks in here are all original material, and then the last 3 are re-recorded versions of their Sacrament of Death EP from 2016. And this band is yet another band that pretty much takes that old school death metal formula and combines it with that hardcore intensity, and holy shit, does this band do it well. I've seen this band live twice now, and they flat out fucking crush. The guitar tone on here is fucking ridiculous. It is thick, it is chunky, and the riff work is just fucking great. These songs find a way to be just brutal as hell, but very catchy and very infectious, and I love the songwriting here. It's still kind of meat and potatoes, but there's enough technical flair in there to really sort of spice it up. The grooves are solid, the breakdowns are nasty, and holy shit, the vocals are fucking incredible. A lot of this latches on to that early 90s death metal style like Obituary and Death, but they bring in a lot of brutal elements like early Suffocation as well, namely the second track, Relics from the Past, which has this really cool triplet riff and then harmony, and then that kind of morphs into a really just nasty tremolo riff and then harmony. And I really like that use of dynamics on here. It kind of keeps this old school formula fresh. And there's a really cool difference between the newer songs versus the older songs. The Sacrament of Death material is definitely more brutal, more focused on just like sort of big, heavy, like almost Mortician style riffs. And the breakdowns on Doused in Flames and Skinned Alive have a little bit more of like a brutal death slam vibe to them. But again, sitting back and listening to this reminded me of when I got into death metal initially in the 90s. Like I got into Obituary and Cannibal Corpse, and a lot of this has that sort of aesthetic, but it feels again fresh, and that sort of punchy hardcore groove kind of adds like a different kind of aggression to it. Again, much like Frozen Soul. Now I know this band is currently working on new material because they played a new song last time we saw them and it sounded fucking sick. I would say probably next year is when we'll probably hear it. But in terms of getting stuff that's out right now, I strongly recommend this. I honestly recommend everything that I've heard by them. So if you can find their earlier EPs, which I don't think have been reissued, go get them. And Wretched Illusions too is absolutely fantastic. But this EP, I think, is indicative of the direction they're heading, and I really fucking like the direction they're heading because this is just absolutely sick. This is some of the best representation of current Texas death metal out there. I think this band is possibly poised to break even bigger in the future, but time will tell. I'm looking forward to that new one, and well, for now, I'm just going to recommend you check out this and literally everything else by them. So check it out. And finally, Universally Estranged, reared up in Spectral Predation. This is the debut album from this Houston-based band, came out last year on Blood Harvest Records. I didn't know about this one until this year. I actually got this in a distro and jammed it and actually had a collection update not too long ago. I was like, holy shit, how did I miss this one? Because this is just fucking weird. This is probably the weirdest band on this entire list, just in terms of their strange sci-fi atmosphere and weird technical riffing. Like, this is very akin to bands like Gorguts and Blood Incantation, but possibly even stranger. Now, whereas those bands generally write longer songs that are, you know, more full of like lavish movements, this is just fucking nuts. The songs are more condensed, the transitions can come out of everywhere, like every conceivable fucking point in the universe, and along with that, bring a weird, scary tentacle monster to molest your brain or something, whatever the fuck's going on in this cover. But that kind of makes for this being a really engaging, strange listen because, again, the atmosphere complemented with the weird angular riffs and wild drumming and vocals that seem buried in the mix, but they're kind of sitting in the right spot because they're all just like low gurgles with the occasional scream. This whole album is very strange. Atmosphere aside, the songwriting is very technical, lots of strange, angular, dissonant riffs, lots of wild drum patterns, and again, transitions. But they do like to throw in some like really catchy riffs, namely The Visitor and Teeming with That of Unknown Origin. There's a lot of interesting song titles in there, especially Sentient Meatbag, which I still definitely identify with. And those hooks are kind of necessary because this can be a very disorienting listen. Like, you have weird transitional atmosphere, there's like 80s spacey synths that are kind of like cynic-y at times. So having some like good riffy moments, especially like the title track and Interscene Psychic Bloodletting. I don't even know what the fuck that means. But those have some, like, you know, killer kind of thrashy riffs in there. Like, oh, okay, I'm back on Earth now and not being, you know, molested by aliens. But I wanted to throw this one in for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of showcases yet another strange avenue that death metal is going down in terms of Texas. And two, they have a new album coming out, I believe, at the end of this month, and I kind of want to check it out. If it's anything like this one, I'm probably going to really enjoy it because I found this to be like a really wild listen. Like, even the extra stuff in here, like the weird end to Blistered Under the Blue Illusion, it kind of sounds like, you know, the old organ players at fucking hockey games way back. It sounds like that person showed up to work really high and just kind of fucked with the settings and added some spacey effects behind it. I don't know, it's kind of cool. Even the interlude on here is actually really interesting in terms of how it kind of sets up the next song and all the weird Moog synth stuff. It's just a fun, strange release, and I'm kind of eager to hear what they do next, because this is just fucking wild. So yeah, if you're looking for something new and underground and just weird, I recommend this, and I have a good feeling about the new one. So I don't know, we'll see when that one comes out, because either I'm going over it in a collection update or I'm doing a fucking review on it. Either way, I'm gonna fucking cover it, and of course, either way, check this out. All right, that knocks out Texas's death metal scene, at least in terms of like 10 albums I could bring up. Like, I could have done a fucking lot more, but that would be a really long video because y'all got a lot of fucking death metal. Not a bad problem to have, but I might be a bit biased. So as for the next one, I really don't know. Like, the Texas one was kind of in the back of my mind when I did the Ohio one, just because we both had like rabid upcoming scenes in terms of one particular style. This is getting like a little bit trickier as I kind of branch out a little bit more, so I don't know where I'm going to go next, but I'm definitely going to find something because this has been a fun series so far and you guys seem to really like it. So who knows what I'm picking next, but I'm probably going to stick to doing one of these like a month or at least bi-monthly because these are a lot of fucking fun. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our shop is there, and we have audio versions of our episodes, but there's also a link to our Patreon, so if you'd like to help us out there, that'd be fucking awesome. And of course, thank you so much to everyone that has liked, subscribed, followed, all that shit. This is that part of the video where I get awkward and I can't think of shit to say, but all of it is from the heart and all of it is honest. I am eternally grateful to all of you guys. It's just been amazing to be able to do this and get such a cool response and continue to keep growing, because this is just insane. It, again, exceeded my expectations fucking forever ago, and well, let's just keep going, because this has not ceased being fun one fucking bit, and it is like mostly due to you guys. So once again, thank you so much. You all fucking rule, and we will catch you later.